Amy Skinner, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So, one of the themes of this podcast that I've learned, or something about people that I've learned in doing this podcast now for about 2 years, 2.5 years, is that how people think about training today and how they ride and how they train and how they consider horses is often a reaction or an answer to what they did or didn't like as a child when they were exposed to horses or when they were just exposed to authority of some kind. What do I need to know about your childhood in order to understand a little bit about your perspective on horses today?
You're going to get me in trouble right off the bat.
Here we go. Buckle up, everybody.
Well, I learned to ride at a military riding school, and it was quite intense and quite rigid. It was a high pressure, quick acceleration through riding kind of an experience. So I was jumping like a meter. This was in South America, so I use a metric system. I was jumping like a meter when I was like 6 years old. So it was it was intense, very rigid.
Okay.
And so that always hit me when I was a kid as being hard. It was hard to see the horses treated the way they were treated. And it was something that I always wrestled with, that I loved riding and I loved being around the horses, but it was hard to experience that type of environment. So there was always this kind of dichotomy for me between loving riding and hating the way that riding went.
When you say that it was really intense, it sounds to me like it was the what I sometimes call like the typical riding diet, where it's like you're taught the mechanics of how to achieve the skills that you need to achieve in order to move up. It wasn't really about horse behavior or understanding the horse or anything like that.
Yeah, and it was very much a culture of like, you have to do it because your instructor said it, so suck it up and do it. And the horse has to do it because you said so no matter what. So like, as a 6-year-old with not amazing balance or amazing skills, but the horse had to do whatever I said because I'm the authority. You know what I mean? And that was the militaristic culture there was, if you fall off, get back on unless you're dead. And if the horse doesn't do it, he will be severely punished until he does. So I saw a lot of very severe corrections, especially on refusals before jumps and that kind of thing. And that was hard to watch as a kid.
What did you notice about the people in that environment? How did they fare?
So the students were actually very competitive with each other, and it created this environment of wanting to be approved of by the instructor at the expense of your riding mates. It was always like, I'll be better behaved and get his approval more than you. So it kind of made this elbows race, I felt like, with the other students. And, it was a very, very much promoting like who can be the toughest, who can be the bravest, and who can sort of swallow any reservations and just be a good boy or a good girl. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So then what?
I got scared. So I loved riding and I was a very bold rider. But when I started to get to higher jumps, I started to get afraid. And I started to
because you didn't actually have the skills to do it.
No, not at all.
Right.
And I look at old pictures of me riding and I'm like hanging on the horse's neck and like, there's no way that I should have been jumping that high. And the horses that we rode were, hot thoroughbreds that were basically half crazy, and that's what I knew. That's what I learned to ride on. So the horses would be sometimes a little bit scary or really too much energy for a 6 or 7-year-old. And so I started to get afraid and I started to have a lot of trouble making the horse go over the jumps. And so the horses would start to refuse because I was basically making them stop, like kind of sneakily stopping them to try and get a way out. But then the horse would get really punished. And so it was sort of like, do I choose between going over the jump I'm afraid of or watching this horse get punished? And I actually stopped jumping after that and ended up, because we moved. So it was sort of a lucky situation. And I ended up trying other disciplines when we were moving around because my dad was Air Force. So we were always at different barns. But that was my introduction to riding. And it was, I still have a hard time with jumping. I still get to like a certain height where it's like not play anymore. And it starts to turn into a jump. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do I don't want to do this anymore.
So you had a very competition-focused introduction to riding.
Yep.
I want to come back to you don't compete at all today. But I want to know kind of where you went after that. So that sounds like, it sounds like the passion for riding and horses was stirred in you. And that must have persevered regardless of the fact that now you had some fear, you had some concern for the horses. Where did you go after that?
Well, I always wanted to get to know the horses, and I always felt like the lessons did not allow for that. It was like, here's your horse, get on. And there was like a groom that would tack it up and take it away from you because it was, military riding school. So I was always trying to like watch them get their feet done or, help them get fed. And it was always kind of pushed out of those areas because I was a colonel's daughter and you don't do that, But I went to different places as my parents moved around where it was encouraged to start grooming, and I started to learn to love taking care of the horses and getting to know them. And that always stuck with me as like something so important that was glossed over so much, that's all I wanted to do. And I didn't want to do the up downs for like an hour. I wanted to take care of the horses and get to know them. So that stuck with me as something that I always loved. And, even today, that's something I teach. Is just good husbandry and good relationship building and that kind of thing with horses. I still feel like that is glossed over a lot in lesson programs. So that's what stuck with me in the beginning, and I think that's where that led.
Do you think that your desire to see and be seen by the horse is at all related to the fact that you had a very, I don't know if the right word is destabilized upbringing, but you moved around a ton. You were never in one place. That had to feel somewhat chaotic as a kid. Maybe not even a negative thing, but that had to feel somewhat chaotic to a child. Do you think that had anything to do with you wanting to see some sort of deeper connection with these horses because they were always there. They were always around.
Yeah, absolutely. I moved around so much, and I was around, even in the same language, there was different ways of speaking the language. And it was always like interacting with people in every new environment was such a guessing game. And I was always guessing it wrong. And it was very stressful. You come in as an outsider and try to figure out what your place is. And it's just this like unspoken set of rules that people don't realize they have, and all these cultural norms that you don't know about. And it was very stressful to learn to integrate with people. But horses are the same everywhere, pretty much. And so horses were a constant for me that I could look forward to because they speak the same language everywhere. They don't care if you're speaking English or Spanish. They care about how you're interacting with them. And it was something that I could do easily. It made sense to me. I could get along there. And it just was, it's a nice feeling. Horses don't care if you're too tall, too fat, too young, too old. You know what I mean? They're just there.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed, Amy, when you go to your website that I was struck by is one of the first phrases that you see on your website is classical dressage. And then right next to it, one of the first photos that you see is you holding a cowboy hat riding in Western tack. And I was like, those two things we don't often think of going hand in hand. What's up with that?
Cross-dressing.
Oh, we're really going to get in trouble on this podcast.
So to me, classical dressage is a philosophy and set of principles. It is not a look or a style per se. It's a way of relating to the horse through feel, through using your seat in a way that's intuitive and clear and progressive. That's what I think of classical dressage. It's teaching the horse balance, and that can apply to anything. That's what classical dressage means to me. It's just simply good communication and balance.
How was that? How did you begin your journey in learning that, though? Because you did not, as we just learned, you did not come from a background that was valued.
No. So in bopping around a lot, I ended up stumbling on the vaquero style horsemanship. And I loved that because it was the opposite to me of what I had grown up with, which was intense pressure, disregard of the horse as an entirety, a lot of pulling, a lot of spurring, a lot of hitting and that kind of thing. And so when I stumbled upon, I think it was Buck Brannaman standing there in an arena with 20 horses and his horse was on a loose rein, just kind of dozing. I was like, is his horse drugged? Because I've never seen anything like that. You know, like there's no way a horse could be standing there with 20 horses running around it and his horse is just sleeping. So that really became appealing to me, and I started learning that style, and I started getting into ranch work and Western riding, and I loved it. But there was something really, really missing still, which was basically the balance of the horse's body. And I didn't really know what it was until I met my teacher, Teresa Doherty, who teaches in the style of Walter Zettel, because she was his student for 10 decades, basically, all eternity. 10,000 years. So she
I'm sure she appreciates that.
Please don't listen to this, Teresa. Just a long, long time. So she started teaching me about the horse's body, and it started to really connect the dots to me that the horse's behavior and body balance are so connected. And so then I really became a deeply interested student of classical dressage, and that's pretty much my focus. Although I still love ranch riding and I still love Western riding. And I do dabble in that world some still, hence the cross-dressing.
The cross-dressing, right. So you do not compete in this moment in your life and in your career. Excuse me.
I don't.
Why?
Well, it's not for entirely hating competition. I would not be opposed to competing if I had a horse that I felt like it wouldn't rock their world. So, you know, for me, the top priority is having a good relationship with my horse and putting the horse first. And if I had a horse that I could take into a competition ring right now and not rock their mind, then I would do it. But every horse that I typically have horses that have mental and physical problems. That's kind of my job. And so it's not often that I have a horse that's like happy-go-lucky, let's go school a first level show on the weekend. And besides that, I think the focus on showing, at least in dressage, doesn't seem to put the horse first. You know, the last time I took a horse to a show, it was just for fun. I took a training level horse to a training level test, and the scores that I got back were like, excellent partnership, really soft, really happy, 5s, needs to be more round. And I was like, this is freaking training level. How is this horse supposed to be more round? You know, he did a fantastic job. His job is to accept the contact, to go straight, to make circles, and to be a good boy. That's basically what training level is about. So how is it that I'm getting 5s because he's not round enough in training level? So I have a hard time with the way that things are scored. You know, I got the same marks on a first level test as like, needs to be more round, needs to be more round. Like, what does that mean? You know, what is a first level frame to a judge versus to me? And in a classical progression, a first level frame is not deep and round, you know? So I struggle with that, and it would be hard to put my horse in an environment where to win, I would have to compromise him physically and mentally.
It's interesting because I think that there are far more people who struggle with the tension between competing and riding according to their values than we would think. There are people who do not struggle with that. They choose one or the other, and they don't even think about the other side. But for instance, JJ Tate, she's been on this podcast before.
Yep.
She's a brilliant dressage rider, and she and I have talked for ages about how she's navigated that for herself and how that feels like a palpable tension in her own life. Mm-hmm. She wants to represent, her goals are to represent her country and to do all of the big international Grand Prix. And, and at the same time, she wants to do it in a way that she feels very in integrity about and very sound about.
Yeah.
And those two things don't always feel like they go hand in hand.
Yeah. I know some people that are doing it really well and they work really hard at it, and it is really something to see. I mean, it's somebody to be really proud of, and somebody I'm like thrilled to be associated with them because of the amount of heart and work they put into their horses. And to show that and prove that you can do it ethically is really incredible. It's something that I aspire to, but I also don't have my hopes and dreams set in it. You know what I mean? That if I have to scratch, it's not the end of the world. And I had a horse that I had planned to get my bronze on, and he was like the horse I was going to do that with. And I was going to prove that you can have a horse on turnout, living a happy life and competing. And he just broke down mentally so much when we started to think about showing that I realized that my desires were getting in the way of his well-being, and I had to drop it. And it was kind of humbling to watch myself basically be called out by my horse. It was basically like, you are melting my brain, because the way that I ride when I start to think about competition is not the person that I like to be. So that's something that I'm struggling with, finding that balance. It's not to say it can't be done. I just haven't found the way to do it yet.
One of the things that I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and I can't remember which podcast this was on, but one of the things that it's like a quote that has stuck with me in my head is that part of being a compassionate person is understanding that and not expecting that other people are in the same point in their journey that you are. And so it's interesting because when we think about compassion for our horses, there is a lot of, can you listen to your horse enough to actually see the reality of what they're trying to tell you? And that's for plenty of horses. Like, that doesn't mean no competing.
Right.
And I know that you're not inherently against competition as you're saying either, but I also think that it's can we see that in a way that we're not looking through the goggles of our own pride and
it's
letting
hard.
that go? And there
It's
are
very
people
hard.
doing it. As you say, like, there are lots of people who are doing beautiful, beautiful jobs with their horses. And, I think that sometimes in like the landscape of social media, it can seem really, really negative. I might have shared this on this podcast before, but I was having a conversation with somebody earlier this year, and I said, I actually feel, they asked me if I felt more encouraged or discouraged about the way that horse sports and horsemanship are sort of intersecting, just based on having the conversations that I have. And I firmly feel encouraged, not discouraged. And they did not agree. So maybe it's just this little microcosm of wonderful people who listen to this podcast and come on and, like yourself, and be guests. But, I think that one of the things that a lot of professional horsemen ask is, how do I legitimize myself as a business if I don't compete? How have you done that?
Well, I had that same struggle, and that was part of what made me feel this intense pressure to get a bronze or to get some form of recognition, because here I'm out here telling people to do the opposite of what they want to do. So what leg do I have to stand on? You know what I mean? Is I'm asking you to not crank your horse's chin to your chest, but why? And so I felt like I needed some sort of validation to my skill set. And so the showing was something that I felt pressured to do. And over time I realized that just wasn't going to be it. You know what I mean? And I have found that the amount of horses that were lame and got sound, or unhappy and got happy, or students who were scared who found more confidence is the only calling card that I'll ever really have to stand on. And that just had to be okay. And the trouble with that is that if you have a bronze medal, you have this little medal and everyone can see it, and there's no denying this is a bronze medal, right? But everyone can look at a horse subjectively and say whether he's happy or not, or sound or not, or moving well or not. And so you don't have the same firm validation. You know what I mean? Like, I think that horse looks happy. You think he looks too open. I think that horse looks soft and round. You think he looks too, I don't know, whatever. Everything is subjective. So I have to be okay with the fact that not everyone is going to see my little bronze medal that I have for validation. You know what I mean? But it has worked. I mean, I'm not starving to death, so I've got something.
As you mentioned earlier, a lot of the horses that come to you have some sort of, they are needing rehabilitation in some way. Yeah. That is your specialty. That's kind of what you hang your hat on in this moment in your career. And these things always change. Mm-hmm. Do you think, man, we're really going to get in trouble with this podcast. Do you think that competition is woven into the issues that you see with the problem horses that you get? Is that the common denominator or not?
It's not the common denominator because I get so many different kinds of horses. But the horses I get to rehab who have been competing are purchased because they're talented and young, right? And so they go into intense training from a young age and they start competing from a young age, and they are never taught good citizenship skills or confidence or anything but training for the test, training for the test, training for the test, push, push, push. And by the time they're 8 or 9, they start to break down, and that's when I get them. And they don't know how to get along with other horses. They don't know how to walk calmly on the showgrounds. They don't know how to get in the trailer without the chain. You know, they're just lacking severely in life skills, and they're lacking severely in actual education to the aids because they're packaged up and pushed into these movements, but they don't connect the dots between their brain and their feet and why. You know what I mean? So I think that competition can very easily create what training for the test without training for the purpose of the movement. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you have this like mechanical looking shoulder in the horse can do, or these like mechanical flying changes, but the horse doesn't understand the why. And that is very easily done with competition focus. And so then you are doing these mechanical movements that degrade the joints and degrade the body and degrade the horse's mind. And so it's a total rehab. And nobody wants to have a 4th level horse who is now a total rehab. Nobody wants to be told that this horse needs to learn to walk again on a loose rein or like do baby elementary stuff because he doesn't know why he got there.
Where do you think that comes from? Like, where do you think, you know, as kind of like the theme of what we've been talking about, both kind of on and off camera, is this theme of pressure. And, you know, I think that I use competition as like a starting point in this question because competition inherently puts pressure on us. And so pressure can cause you to behave in instances or feel differently than you do when the pressure is not there. But when you talk about life skills with horses, this is something that's really interesting to me. Because I think that oftentimes we think about horses who have certain skills that they are missing. Maybe they don't. This is actually something that I talked about on another podcast. And, you know, the example we used was like the horse who has to be mounted in a stall. Because if you mount him at the mounting block or outside, he'll bolt and he'll take off.
Yep.
In your book, you actually wrote about a horse that did just that, cantered away when you would get on it.
My horse, yeah.
Yep. Do you think that that is a symptom of the human not knowing what life skills a horse needs? Do you think it comes from choosing to skip it because they're moving on to other things too quickly? Like, what is it?
Well,
where do you think it comes from? It
happens in all disciplines that I know of. I don't think it's just dressage to blame. But you have, so if you think about the foundations of classical dressage, it was for training war horses. So a war horse had to have life skills, like more than we can even imagine today. A war horse had to be able to deal with the stuff of life calmly so that you can, you know, and that's what I loved about ranch horses was the ranch horses could do all kinds of stuff. They had a lot of confidence. They knew where their feet were. They probably didn't get on the bit ever, but they could manage their life and their body and things around them. So the war horse had to stand calmly for mounting, get in the trailer or whatever the modes of transportation were. They had to do stuff. And now if you have a focus of competition or a focus of validation, you go to the show and you show off how good your horse was and you get the ribbon. That's very motivating to do it again and get more ribbons and better scores and show that off. But you miss out on the stuff of life, like teaching the young horse to just stand calmly to be saddled because you're busy thinking about getting him to accept the contact or to get round or to, you know, trot or show off his fancy gaits. And so I think that competition plays a role in that and getting people to push toward teaching for the show, for the movement, instead of teaching the horse the life skills to then develop the movement. You know, and that's happening in kids' schools too. You know, we teach for the test instead of teaching to understand the information. You regurgitate the thing you're taught so you can pass to the next level. And that's kind of the way we look at education now as a whole. Because every single clinic that I have, somebody shows up with a horse and they tell me what level they're schooling, but they can't walk on a loose rein and they can't stop at the mounting block and get on without somebody holding it, or they can't get on the trailer after. And I always want to know how you have a 4th level horse that can't stand calmly, because what life skills have they learned? They've been training for the test, moving up to the next level, training for the test, moving to the next level. So they're not learning the scaffolding that makes up the bigger picture. They're learning pieces and parts and performing it. And it's dancing bears. It's sad, but it's dancing bears that are regurgitated little movements.
You have a section in your book called Toddlers and Horses. And of course, I was naturally drawn to that as the mother of 2 toddlers, and you reference essentially picking your battles with your toddler. So the example was, you say to your toddler, no, you can't grab the electric fence because that will hurt you. That is for your safety. But is it the end of the world if you rearrange all the hoof picks and draw on the wall? No, it's not the end of the world. So I'm going to let you do it.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times a day I go through this exact scenario and mental checklist. And I'm just like, okay, well, now I am scrubbing chalk off my newly painted wall, and that's where we are.
Yeah.
With horses, one of the things that I have wondered about, because I know we need to pick our battles, but how do we pick them? How do we decide what matters to address? How do we decide where to set a boundary and to use some pressure about it, and what to just leave alone?
So I think that depends a lot on the horse. And you have to remember that the horses I'm dealing with are largely troubled horses. And so the parameters and boundaries on them are far different than your average happy-go-lucky horse, because they're often way more flexible or more fluid because they suffer so much trying to understand. But I think that it comes down to being clear in the first place of what the expectations and parameters are, and then adjusting for the moment. So for example, if it's okay to crowd your space 1 minute, but not the next, that's not clear. And the horse doesn't know what is expected of them. And a lot of letting things slide is actually reinforcing behavior you don't want. So in that case, it's not the horse's fault. It's the human's fault, right? But say you have good boundaries, spatial boundaries with the horse, and that's really clear 90% of the time, but you go to a new location and the horse is having trouble being calm, that might be a time to let that slide a little and expect less. So I think
makes sense.
Clarity is really, really important, but flexibility in its application for real life scenarios is important, because then you just get into these huge fights with horses, asking them to do things they can't do.
Do you think a lot of choosing those battles does come down to the state that the horse is in that moment to be able to actually learn something?
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you're at home and everything is calm, they're ideally in a good learning frame of mind, then you can absolutely make clear and teach. But I kind of have this running rule that you can either teach something new, you can expose the horse to something new, or you can increase the intensity of something that they already know, but only one at a time. So
say that again more slowly, because that's really good. I want to break this down.
Okay. You can teach a new skill, increase the intensity of a learned skill, or expose the horse to something new, only one at a time. And so if you're in
very important to remember.
If you're in a new environment, you have exposed the horse to something new, that's not the time to teach a new skill or increase the intensity of a skill. That's the time to do something that you already know very well and lower the expectations.
Give me an example, a real life example.
Okay, so I've started probably 3 billion and 2 colts, and I've only done a good job on 2 maybe that I'm proud of. And this is because I'm always learning of where that line is.
Okay.
So you have a horse. You have a horse that
I love this. Never satisfied, always hungry. Love it.
And that's just to give you an example of how much experience I think it takes to find that line. Is you have a young horse who everything is new. Everything is fresh, right? So I saddle the horse at my barn, and he's kind of okay with it, but not super calm, because the saddle is always a little bit scary, right? So I get on and saddle him and go through my groundwork repertoire. Then I go to a new place like a clinic, and saddling is just off the charts, not even possible. And me trying to saddle him because he's so scared of the new environment and he can't hold still would blow his mind. So that is a time to not even try to saddle him and just focus on getting him to be calm, doing exercises he already knows in the new environment.
Because he cannot handle, there's a little bit of fear. There's 2%, or we'll say 10% of fear about saddling. And then you go to a new environment and there's 70% fear about the new environment. And that combined is a boiling point.
Exactly. So he's accepting of the saddle at home, but not completely confident. I can get by with it okay at home. But when I take the pressures of the new environment, add that, you have a boiling point. And that is a place where the only thing that can come from that is sending that horse through the roof and teaching him that I cannot help him.
So if we follow that logic, our horses, when we go to compete, because a lot of people who are listening do compete, and I would love to compete again. I love competing. But if we follow that logic, when whatever we are expected to do in competition, our horse should be very comfortable doing at home, very at ease doing at home, so that there's never the combined cumulative boiling point of fear of something. They're a little bit scared of the Liverpool at home, but like, I know if I tap behind my leg, like he'll get over it. He'll get over it. But then we're in a new environment and it's a different Liverpool. There's other horses running around. We're in a completely new place that he's not familiar with. Also, it's windy and 32 degrees. That is where, even if you are really lucky and your horse does get over it and you're not penalized for having a stop at the Liverpool, you might have the impression that your horse then is okay with Liverpools. But then we're really caught off guard the next time they go to a show and they stop at the Liverpool. And then we're like, what the fuck? We knew how to do Liverpools. And then it's like a little bit of outrage.
Yep. So you have a bank account where you are educating the horse and you're adding to the bank account, giving them confidence. You're putting into your savings account, ideally, if you're training well, giving your horse confidence and stuff by repeatedly making things easier and more positive in outcome, right? So you go over the jump, the horse was scared, things went out okay, felt good. That's notch one in the right direction, right? Your horse refuses, you smack them on the ass, they go over the jump, you have removed one, right? That's a negative outcome. The horse did it. You perceive it as winning potentially, but the horse lost. So you've stolen from the horse to get what you want. So when you go to a show, you're already in a more tense situation where the horse is already dipping below zero into hopefully your borrowed account that you can borrow from, where you have plenty of things to give the horse confidence from. I'm very confident schooling at first level. I'm training the horse second level movement, so I'm going to show at first level or lower because I know my horse is confident in all of these things. So that, when a tense situation pops up, I can borrow from my account, give the horse a little confidence, and when I go home, I've got to put back in, make it easier, make it more positive. But, I hear this all the time. My horse is bored of the lower level, so I have to increase the intensity so that he has enough adrenaline to get through the test because he needs all that adrenaline to get through those upper level movements. Well, adrenaline only gets you so far. You're stealing from the horse over and over and over again. We know that adrenal fatigue burns out the body. That's where I come in. Horse is zonked and the brain is melted and the body is destroyed because adrenaline can keep you looking sound until it wears off. And then you have a lame horse.
Same with humans.
Yep.
The exact same thing happens with humans. I mean, it's like when you are really burned out at work and then you go to a week-long work conference, or like a 7-day work conference, God forbid, and you are just running on fumes, you'll be fine for that 5 to 7 days. And then you get home, and then every time, like I was talking to my husband about this because this just recently happened to him. He had like 2 days of like really intense, really high stress meetings. And I said, you're going to get sick on Thursday when you're back. So we should just plan on like you not doing anything. And he's like, what? Like he was thinking I was going to poison his coffee.
Right.
And I was like, no, I am seeing this happen because you're not 100% going into this. And then you're going to withdraw from your bank account. To the point that you're in a deficit so that when you come back home, you are going to crash and burn. And like, that is exactly what happened. And I think that we forget that much like humans who need restorative experiences.
Yeah.
Horses do as well. And I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, we don't even know what those are for them. In theory, like I have one horse who a trail ride is like, he's like on the beach in Puerto Rico. And he's like, this is amazing.
And for other horses, it scares the shit
horse,
out of them.
that's a long silent scream.
Exactly. That's not your reward cool down for a horse who's scared of trail riding.
And this is something that that even in small increments during my ride, you know, I've had to really think about what makes this horse happy, what's free for this horse, what puts $1, even a penny back in their bank account. And for one horse, that might be that when they're taking a break, they get to stand. And for another horse, standing is actually more difficult for them than just walking around on a loose rein. Like they got to move their feet. They got to move their feet. And I think I was always so programmed to do the harder thing because that makes a better horse. But when you're having those moments that are free for your horse, that this is truly a break, do the thing that they actually like to do. Do the thing that puts pennies back into their debit account, not the thing that like does create a little bit of friction for them. Like my gelding, who like he would much rather walk and move his feet than just stand. Standing is hard. So we don't do that.
That was something that was ingrained in me when I was doing the Vaquero stuff, was you always do the opposite of what the horse wants to do to teach them, right? To make it.
Yes.
So if the horse has trouble standing, you work at it until they stand.
I have had that said so many times to me. Absolutely.
And when I started working with my teacher, she was like, stop making war against the horse. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm just training. And she was like, every time the horse wants something, you steal from them. And you're like, she's like, how are you going to make a war horse if you always argue with them? And so she would have me do things like if the horse spooked away from a corner, I would leg yield away from that corner. And she was like, just shape it and make it constructive. And for me, I was like, that's doing what he wants. And she was like, stop fighting the horse so much. And then what happened is the more I would use their movement, and it wasn't just letting them do whatever they wanted. It was like, okay, we'll turn this into a leg yield, or we'll turn this into a trot transition, or basically using their evasion to teach a movement. My horses stopped evading. My horses stopped having trouble getting in the trailer. They stopped having, and I was like shocked because I was always training all these things as individual pieces. Like I have to teach you to get in the trailer. I have to teach you to stop at the block. I have to teach you and fix. And then I suddenly realized my horses just stopped evading, like as a lifestyle. It was gone. And I could not believe it because, you know, my human brain is so segmented and arrogant and thinking like, I have to teach them this stuff.
I have to address it. I have to address it. Yep. Every single time. Everything they do.
Yep. And the horses were just like, oh my God, you just are so hard to be around, and now I can't get
You're
caught.
So annoying.
You're just so horrible. This was my teacher was the first one who ever said that to me, who didn't reward me for being a good trainer. You know, she was like, stop waging war on your horses. I can't even bear to look at you. And I was like, you hurt my feelings. And she was like, well, imagine how they feel. It's like, oh my God.
Man.
So now it's not that you let them do whatever they want. It's just that you don't wage war on their nature, and they start to give and give and give. So you put into their bank account more than you take, and they will give you more than you can imagine. And that sounds really cheesy, but it's just shocking. It's just shocking. Like the horse in my book that was running away with me is the one my daughter rides, you know, and my daughter just sits up there and my horse is like, whatever, I'll walk super slowly, you know, and, I have waged war on that horse more than any horse in my life. And the way that she's turned around is just a testament to how amazing horses are, because I don't deserve anything from her, and she's given me more than she should. It's really amazing.
One of the things that I asked you about earlier, you know, was choosing your battles. And I think that is very much the same thing, where I think that so often we are sort of sold this idea, and it's not entirely untrue. It's just, it's conditionally true that to be a good horse trainer, you fix the things, you address the things that your horse isn't good at or doesn't like to do. You improve his weaknesses. But the thing is that you also have to improve his strengths and work with his strengths, because that's what gives horses confidence. It's the same as teaching kids,
Absolutely.
like, you know, the example that literally happened this weekend is we have like a big, you know, art easel that my just turned 3-year-old plays on. She was playing with that outside. She decides to take her poster paint and paint on the siding of our house, our home siding. It's still there. And I had this moment where oh man, I just, that like mom rage really, I could like feel it boiling. And I was like,
Yep.
okay. What am I going to do here? I'm at a fork in the road. I can react one of two ways. And the right thing to do, and it took me a little bit to get here, but the right thing to do is just to simply turn her body and say, here, paint on this instead.
Yep.
Instead of grabbing the paintbrush out of her hand, throwing it off the deck and being like, what is wrong with you? We don't paint on the house.
Right.
And she did. And she just started happily painting on the poster.
That's amazing.
It's kind of the same thing I think that we sort of have to do with our horses.
Yeah.
Where I think that there probably are moments where there has to be conflict for safety reasons or for teaching moments or whatever when the horse is in the state to learn. But there are also moments where we just like kindly redirect. Any mom of a young child will know what this is, where it's like, we're not going to walk into the busy road. We're going to walk this way.
Well, that's such a hard thing to learn and such a fine line that's so fluid. And that's why I say I'm only proud of 2 horses I've ever started, because I've probably overdone and underdone almost every single one of them in terms of teaching.
I want to read a section from your book to you just to make you uncomfortable.
That will do that.
Because I want to come back to this. There's a question at the end for me. As I was reading this, I had a question at the end. So this is from your book, To Catch a Horse, which this was your first or second book?
It's my first book, and I hate it now. So,
oh, good. Well, here you go. My mare was once ridden in a B.O.B., big ol' bit, which she began gaping her mouth to avoid. She was then put in a flash noseband to keep her mouth shut. After she couldn't avoid the bit by opening her mouth, she began tossing her head up. And then she was equipped with a nice short martingale to prevent that behavior. What this created was a racing, forehand-heavy, pissed-off horse that had the most overdeveloped underneck I've ever seen, and one that was ready to kill the entire world. She was upset, frustrated, scared, and not interested in listening to anything anyone had to say. She'd been argued with, shut down, and disregarded as an intelligent being with a high sense of self-preservation. Not only is this sad, but take all that gear off, and that was one dangerous animal. So in comes Horsemanship to the rescue, in quotes, and I put a snaffle bit on her. She goes from a ton of pressure to a nice little snaffle bit that makes me feel better. Does she run through the bit? You bet. But she was running through the rest of her old gear too, to a lesser extent. So the problem is there in both sets of equipment. What needs fixing is not the bit, but her idea on how to operate in relation to the equipment and the humans working it. I had to teach her that I wasn't going to argue with her, but I would wait patiently until she made the correct choices. And yes, it took years. It's better not to start them that way, and she'll probably never feel as nice or light as a horse that was started in the way that could understand from the beginning. But it was worth it to me, and she's an incredible horse. Just skipping ahead to this last paragraph.
This is just not good writing.
Oh, just be quiet. A horse that is trained through pressure and pain response will never truly be safe. One that is avoiding pain or pressure or responding out of fear can't be reliable. Fear is all-encompassing, as anyone with anxiety or panic attacks is familiar with. That fear is your only focus. The rest of the world becomes drowned out. The only horse that is truly safe is one that is mentally relaxed and taught to connect with the rider or handler because he feels safe. Okay, so my question for you is pressure in training relates to safety because it relates also to fear. So the thing that comes to mind in this, as you were talking about the example of your mare, is that rider fear majorly comes into play with the choices that we make on the type of bit. Like here's this horse that needs a bit to be controlled, needs a martingale to keep her head down, needs a tight noseband to keep her from opening her mouth against that bit. But does all of that stem from rider fear? So you have a horse that fears the rider and a rider that fears the horse.
Yep. Yeah, you could divide fear into segments. I would say that the desire for control is stemmed from fear. So whether you're afraid or you don't admit that you're afraid, I think it's fear.
That's a pretty bad equation.
It's a horrible equation, but it's probably the most common equation in the world. It's something that I wrestle with a lot with teaching. So when you start young horses, the first thing that happens to most young horses, and I've absolutely done this myself, is to shut down their forward movement, because their forward movement is unpredictable and you don't like it, right? Their first ride,
and a lot of times they're unbalanced and, that kind of thing. You don't want to, you don't want to be a lawn dart.
So what you tell the horse is, I don't want you to move. And I have a lot of ways to control your movement. Then later on, once they're safe-ish, you're like, okay, now I want you to move, but in this way, right? So to meet a person who is comfortable on a horse that is going and can direct it fluidly is a very rare thing, which is why not many people are that great at starting colts, because most of it is shutting the horse down and then sort of building them back up like an army boot camp kind of a training, right? Like everything that you do and think is wrong, but here's what I want you to do, which is in essence a lot of horse training. Not all of it, but a lot of it to different degrees. And so, it's rider control, because I don't want you to move in a way that I don't like. And it's really hard for most people to let go a little bit of that control and then direct it on a flow. So your young horse gets excited and canters a little too fast. Instead of just pulling back on him or pulling their head around, is just direct it onto a circle and let it slow itself down,
Yeah. Or just riding through it and trusting that horse is going to come back a little bit. Like so much of good riding, especially when we're learning, or especially when the horse is learning, it seems to be about overriding our natural instincts.
That's all it is. There's nothing natural about riding. The minute you take your feet off the ground, you are fighting against your nervous system. Nervous system does not want to be off the ground. So it's not with extreme judgment that I say rider fear is bad for horses, because your nervous system wants you to stay safe just the way your horses does. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, their desire to move and our desire to not move are at odds with each other, and we're the only ones with the big prefrontal lobe that can make logical changes. A horse is a horse and always will be a horse, and we ride expecting it to conform to the way we think, and that's never possible.
If we use or interact with horses in any way, so whether you ride or you just do groundwork or you trail ride or you are, a top show jumper or you are very competitive in the dressage world or whatever the case may be, you have cart ponies, whatever. What do you think humans have a responsibility to know about pressure and how horses perceive it?
Well, I think it's important to understand that they live in a world of pressure and we live in a world of pressure. And if you don't understand it, you're going to be forced to overuse it. And so, your body positioning next to the horse is pressure. The way you're standing, the way you're breathing, the way you're thinking is pressure to a horse. That's why some people who have horses that are very sensitive, if they're in a little bit of a mental tizzy, come out to catch the horse can't be caught, because that's pressure. The horse senses that and is like, oh, you're crazy today. I'm staying far away, because there's pressure, right? So you have to understand how pressure is perceived to horses to use it well, because there's no getting around using pressure. You exist. Your body is pressure. Your positioning is pressure. Even if you're only using treat rewards, your physical body giving them is pressure. And so if you can understand how to use that, you can use it in a really nice flowing feeling kind of a way that doesn't exert excess pressure on the horse. And I think people look at everything in terms of black and white because we're human and we love to do that. Positive reinforcement is cookies only. Negative reinforcement is bad, mean, chase the horse away from the whip, right? When it's really not that simple, because we live in a world of logic and reasoning and the horse lives in the world of sensory input. entirely live in their body. And so they feel everything to a degree that we can't imagine. And so we have to get into that world of feeling and understand feeling and flow to relate to horses well. And that is, if you want to define it as pressure, it is absolutely pressure. But pressure is anything from the feel of my hand raising next to you to like my fist knocking you out. There's a lot of degrees in there between barely touching to extreme pressure. It's not just no pressure or pressure. There's gradients.
There is no pressure.
There is no pressure. I think it's a human delusion to make ourselves feel good to say no pressure, but it doesn't exist. Because your thoughts and your actions and your movement are pressure. But pressure is not inherently bad. Pressure is not of value. I don't think it's a physical experience. And so, the same pressure that can massage tight muscles can feel great to one person versus the next. So it's the human's responsibility to understand and read the effect of their pressure on the horse and gauge it moment by moment to what is needed. What's too much, what's too little, what's excess. And, dancing, two people dancing are using pressure to guide each other. But that's not an unpleasant experience at all. Whereas if you have somebody, hitting you with a baseball bat to move you, then that's undesirable excess pressure. So there's a gradient in there.
In our quest for understanding where we are as riders on that spectrum, how can we audit ourselves? How can we observe within ourselves if we're listening to this podcast and we're thinking, gosh, am I a baseball bat rider or am I a dancing partner rider? I'm not really sure. How do we know?
Well, I think people are really good at superimposing what they think is happening over what is happening, and you need outside eyes. I think you need a good coach to tell you, because, everybody thinks they're riding a certain way when the reality is different. Like, I can't tell you how many times my teacher is like, you're crooked to the right. And I'm like, no, I'm crooked to the left, And then I see a video of myself and I'm like, wow, I was nowhere near accurate on my assessment. And so your body is very good and your brain is very good at normalizing what your normal experience is. And it's hard to see outside of that. So you need somebody to help you. You need a good coach to tell you from a different perspective what you're feeling and experiencing, and you need to learn to feel. And that is a very long and arduous process to learn to feel, because we think we see things when there's 1,000 shades. So take, for example, when I teach people about posture, a lot of people are thinking head up or head down, good or bad. Whereas when I talk about posture, I'm thinking about how's the diaphragm moving the belly, and how's the tail hanging, and how's the muscling in the neck responding. And so there's 10 bazillion more layers to it. But I had to learn that myself, and somebody had to teach me to see it, because when I first started looking at horses, it was head up or head down, right? Yep. That was all there was. Is the head up or is the head down? So
talk to me about the release of pressure then. What should it look like? What should it feel like to the horse, especially as we're trying to teach them to carry themselves in an efficient, correct way?
So I maybe don't have a great, or maybe an easy to understand opinion of release of pressure, because I think of everything as a flow. And I think that many people's understanding of a release of pressure is actually dropping the horse, and it can be more of a punishment than a reward. And I do this a lot with people in my clinics where I have them on a lead rope. And so I'll ask them to do something. So I pick up pressure on the rope. So it's a feel, and then I drop the rope. And I have people close their eyes, and the dropping the rope is the release. Like, the good boy, you did the job. And many people with their eyes closed think that I was punishing them when I released the pressure, because it feels so quick and severe, and they couldn't feel me anymore, and it scared them. And so what I basically am doing, I do it again with their eyes open and show them exactly what they were doing to release the pressure, and they see how offensive it actually is. That's not to say you keep a static pressure all the time, but a release of pressure to me is showing the horse how to be with you. So, example, you do a half halt on the rein. It isn't pick up and drop the rein in a big way. It's actually squeeze, relax your forearm. So you're still with the horse. You're not throwing the horse away. And if you think of everything in black and white terms of pressure or not pressure, that can sound like pressure that doesn't go away. So how is that a reward? But if you think of it from a sensory input to a horse, the horse has a very clear, very easy to follow feeling that is not severe. It's not a quick pickup or a quick drop. It's this step-by-step flowing feeling that's very easy to integrate with. It's more like dancing. You don't have a dance partner that picks you up, throws you across the room, and releases you and then has to go catch you and start all over again. It's flowing step-by-step connection. So release of pressure depends largely on the horse that you're talking to. Sometimes the horse might need the release of your pressure where you have to actually leave the round pen or leave the arena for them to get a release because you're too much pressure for them. But by and by, your release of pressure is we're together now. So you did the canter transition and I'm with you.
A softening.
Yep.
Maybe more than a release.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's we're together now. So you understand where I am. I know where you are. And if I say a really oversimplified explanation of pressure and release would be like, I put the canter aids on, I kick you to go into the canter. As soon as you canter, I relax my leg. But I've basically thrown the horse away from me, right? Like I kick them, they jump forward, and then I kind of have to catch up. Whereas a feeling connection kind of way of thinking about it would be like, I feel your legs going into the canter, I follow them, and then I bring you into the canter, and then I'm with you in that step. So it would never be jump away from my leg or get off my bit. It would be we're going together as this flowing, connected two bodies. And that's a very rewarding and nice feeling. You don't want to get away from your rider because your rider doesn't make you run away from the aids.
Yeah. And it's not really how we're generally coached in the standard diet of riding. I think back to, even like pony lesson days where, days that I was coached, by hunter trainers because that's the ring that I was in a lot as a kid. And it was a lot of inside leg and more inside leg and more inside leg, more inside leg.
Yeah.
It was never even, I was never even prompted to release the pressure once the horse actually yielded to that. And so then you have, it wasn't apply a little bit of inside leg until your horse moves off of it and then soften and go with them. It was just more of this aid all the time.
Yeah.
And in that way, I mean, are we just making our horses just constantly
that's not an
dull?
education. Yeah. That's not an education. That's a trap. So if you take the leg away and the horse falls apart, they're not educated. That's what I always tell my students is you're bringing the horse to the seat, to you, where you are. So the leg can be the support to bring him back to center. But if you can't let go of the horse, they don't know where to be. So, that's just a pressure cooker of building pressure. So it's not meaningful.
And do you think horses generally go in one direction or another when they have that kind of sensory input where they either shut it out and become very, very dull or they escalate?
Yep.
And what determines that?
Well, a lot of it, I think, is the horse's individual nature, maybe their breed, what level of sensitivity they have. I think genetics play a large part of it because if you have a sire and a dam who are really accepting of just dulling to pressure and you breed that mare, you're probably going to get pretty easygoing. So I actually, to give a little anecdote, I had started a bazillion Mustangs and really kind of feral, half crazy horses. So when I got my education on starting horses is like, if you look at this horse sideways, he'll kick your teeth in. So you better be cool. Right. And like, don't you dare pull on his face because he's going to paw your eyes out, And so like, that's what I got used to. And so I worked at a warm blood breeding barn for a while and I watched people go in and like shove a halter over a horse, like a 3-day-old foal. They would just shove him in the corner and stuff this halter over his face and start to pull him out. And I was like, oh my God, be careful. He's going to kill you. His mother's going to attack you. And these people called me the safety Nazi because they were like, you're always overreacting. And I was like shocked after a week. I realized these horses just put up with it. And none of them complained except for the occasional one who was deemed crazy and retired. And I was like, I realized the horses were bred to be extremely complacent. And I started at least a dozen of them and they all just pretty much took the saddle, walk, track, canter, dump. Okay, whatever you want, ma'am. And I was like, are you for real? You're just going to like canter? I say canter and you just do it? You're not going to try to kill me, rub me off on the round pen panels. Okay. And I think that makes really poor horsemen because they escalate pressure so quickly and they stay there because they don't have horses threatening them,
Do you think, as you were speaking, this was crossing my mind. Do you think that the habits that we get into as riders, for the ways that we use pressure, whether we tend to maybe not hold boundaries consistently, or we're constantly shouting at our horse, like pressure never goes from 0 to 1 to 2, it goes from 0 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that a lot of our natural or our habitual tendencies for how we do that are shaped by how we see people in our immediate barnyard, for lack of a better word, doing it?
Yeah.
Are we collectively educating ourselves by who we're surrounded by, whether we're going to whisper or shout?
Do you think about the average education of a young person learning to ride? Is usually a young person is learning to ride on kind of like a dull old school horse who needs to be kicked a lot and pulled a lot to go because they're kind of stiff and they kind of tune out the kids after a while, right? So your kids learn to ride, kick, pull, kick, pull, kick, pull. Horse feels like a plywood board. That's their normal, right? And the instructor's in the corner going kick, 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 kick. So that's normal. And so then you're not going to jump from that to suddenly being a feeling, soft, responsive rider. You're going to assume horses need that amount of pressure. And I do this a lot with students in clinics where I have one person be the horse and one person be the rider and kind of like train each other. And a lot of people will just come right into the person and start to grab and pull. And the other person is like, what the hell? That's way too severe because I'm a little person body. And so what's happening is the person is assuming the amount of pressure as their normal, and they just go straight to pulling, and they don't even realize it because it's how we learn. We've normalized this kind of feeling in horses with our initial education, and a lot of horses just put up with it. So we don't have horses that are like, if you look at the old paintings of cowboy horses back in the 40s and 50s, those horses were pretty rank, had those little upside down necks and those big heads, and they bucked like crazy. And we've pretty much bred that out of horses now because nobody really likes that. We don't want rangy little horses. We want complacent horses. So I think horses put up with it more and people do it more. And it's sort of their assumed way of handling. So people aren't good at feeling and responding to what the moment calls for. There's like, this is how I hold the lead rope. This is how I hold the reins. And I get this all the time at clinics. My last horse just put up with it. So this one is really overreacting. When the last horse was kind of dull and this new one is a little bit sensitive and the person is having trouble making the leap to handling in a different way.
Sensitive has so many connotations. As you were talking, I was thinking about, I've certainly been called sensitive in a negative way in my life.
This horse is just really sensitive.
Yep. Yeah.
Don't be so sensitive.
It's, I think we would generally rather, especially when we're younger and less educated and less experienced, we would generally rather have a horse that's a little bit dull than one that's a little bit sharp or a little bit sensitive.
Yep.
And I think that in many ways, sensitive, just as it sometimes can have a negative connotation with humans, although I do think that is improving in some ways as we learn more about, emotional regulation and just sort of how the human brain works. I think that similarly, it's been cast negatively in horses.
Well, everybody says they want a sensitive horse, and a sensitive connection, but what they mean is I want the horse to respond to what I want them to respond to and not what I actually say.
They want a responsive horse.
Exactly, but only responsive to the things they meant to do. And what sensitive means is taking in all information at a higher level. So that means the accidental aids you gave, that horse picked up on more than a regular horse, including the intentional aids, right? So like I'm a sensitive person, and that means that I pick up on everything good and bad. I feel things more, good and bad. I pick up on people's intentions, despite what they're saying, more, but I also feel better when people like me because I feel both sides more. So you don't get to pick and choose what they're sensitive to. Sensitive means sensitive as a sensory input experience. I feel the sensation of everything more. My daughter can't stand the crease of her socks being wrong on her foot. She's got a perfect way that needs to lay or she's going to lose it, right? But she's also highly attuned to little things that I don't notice, like the way that a leaf looks. She picks up on everything. She feels everything, and that's good and bad. I don't get to choose that she's sensitive only to looking at leaves and making me smile. She is sensitive to her socks, and it is a sensory nightmare half the time. So
Yeah.
you don't get to pick what part of sensitive you like to keep. Sensitive is a life experience. And we don't typically like that because it challenges us to be aware all the time.
And it challenges us to be accountable for our own habits
Yep.
and our own roughness.
Yep, and it kind of sucks. I touched my daughter's hair a little too rough and she's having a meltdown because I wasn't sensitive to her needs. I'm accountable, not her. She's being who she is. I have to change my response. But boy, does it ever put you on the hot seat, like, at all times.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard.
It's not easy. None of this really. None of this is easy.
No.
So.
No, it's not. It's not for the weak. You know, it's not for, I mean, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, you know? Good writing and good communication is extremely difficult, and it's a lifelong endeavor. But I really think that it's just living a good life. It's the same thing. Learning to create boundaries in life, respond well, to communicate well, to respond to every moment differently as the moment calls for. I mean, that's just like, it's not easy.
Amy, in closing, as someone who spends a lot of time and does a lot of work observing the needs and the past baggage of troubled horses, whether that's physically or mentally or both, what do you think those horses would like you to tell humans?
I think that if every horse could tell me to tell something, it would be to treat them like a horse. And that comes from every extreme, because your show people are often guilty of treating the show horse like a toy, like a performance tool. And your amateur backyard people are often guilty of treating the horse like their little pet or their little friend or their little surrogate husband, or however creepy we want to get it. It gets weird fast, right? And those horses aren't allowed to have experiences because people are so protective of them, right? Or sometimes your ranch people are guilty of treating that horse like a machine too, like just go 16 hours a day. And, you know, and I think that collectively all horses want to be treated as they are as a horse and have their needs as a horse attended to from the horse's perspective, not the humans. I think that would solve like all of the problems, all of them.
That also takes a lot of self-awareness.
That is the thing that humans are struggling with the most. So yeah.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I always have this thing that like horses are here to call us to be better people. Dogs are here to love us unconditionally, and cats are here to tell you that their food bowl is empty. That's what our animals are here to teach us.
Amy, thank you so much. This has been really, really fun chatting with you, and thank you for all the work you do and the wisdom that you put out into the world. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. It was a fun talk.